Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Twa Auld Heids. We weren't with you last week because of all the stuff that's been going on. And this is going to be the last time we're going to see you for a while. Over to you, Mike.
Well, we chose Twa Auld Heids might bid adieu, or we might just be saying au revoir. And to find out which that is, folks, you need to maybe watch till the end of the show and you'll find out. Dave, normally in a thing like this, when you're maybe coming to an end of something, at the very end you say thank you to everyone. I want to say thank you at the very beginning. What we've tried to do, and we never thought we were going to end up being quite as constant as this, is go on a learning experience by inviting guests on. And I want to thank everyone that's been a guest. I don't know from your side whether there's anyone more memorable than anyone else.
I've got memorable moments, things that happened. But no, there was something at every single one. I mean, at every single one we learned stuff. Not just when we were on the air either.
Well, that's the interesting bit. I'll come on to that in a second, but just so everyone knows this, if they've only maybe come across the Twa Auld Heids, and I know that has happened recently, we set up a Facebook page. Now, we didn't set it up so that there would be posts on it, but we archived every single thing that we've done since we started. And if anyone wants to, I don't know, listen to Kenny McCaskill or all the bloggers we had on one of the show, all of that is archived under the Twa Auld Heids on Facebook. But you're quite right. Quite often what happened was either before the show, we chatted with the guests, or more importantly, maybe after the show. And how do I put this? We were told things that we weren't allowed to tell anyone, right? And in part, I think that's why we're at this crossroads. And we both agreed this quite. You've got your own very individualistic, in your face way of approaching things. And we're going to go into a period where it's going to get fraught. I mean, it already is. It's going to get fraught with the results of what James Hamilton says about what happened with Nicola Sturgeon. It's going to get fraught with everyone appealing to the audience, vote for me. And it's a good time, I think, to let that roll out without us intervening in it. And that's why we're at this crossroads, why for a time anyway, the Twa Auld Heids will not be on. I want to go back, Dave, in this picture. I want to go back and I want to go forward. And the picture that's on your screen just now is a maze. You can see it as me in the middle of the maze, but just treat it as any sovereign Scot who wants independence for their country. Just over 300 years ago, what I'll call the Lords of the Parliament, because that's who they were called, decided that they would enter into a treaty. And that treaty has bound Scotland ever since. And at the moment, anyone who is in the Yes movement is trying to work out a way of gaining the independent Scotland and withdrawing from that treaty. But here's the problem as I see it. It's what I've learned doing these programs. It's partly also what I've learned just from speaking to people that I know. There's loads of signposts on that maze, Dave. One of them might say, vote SNP 1 and 2. People will go down that route. There might be a signpost that says vote SNP 1, Greens 2, or AFI 2, or ISP 2. Might be a signpost saying sign up to the Digital Covenant. There might be one that says, here's where we go, section 30. We're all over the place. The last two programs we've done, one with Peter Bell, and he has his manifesto for independence. last programme involved David Henry, and he's got his manifesto for Indy. And in the midst of all of that, Dave, all these different ways of thinking about independence, you've also got this huge battle going on over Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon. And one of the reasons, perhaps the principal reason, is in the middle of that, your opinions or my opinions are just other shouts in a very, very confusing scenario. So what I want to try and look at during this programme is some of the thoughts that have come to me. They're not finalised thoughts. One is, the very last one I'll talk about is a finalised thought, because it's to do with not just gaining independence, but what happens after independence. But for now, can I shut up and just pass over to you, your own plans, Dave, maybe for the next few months?
This is probably going to piss people off really much. But as far as things are concerned at the minute, in 2 weeks' time, Hamza Yousaf's hate crimes bill is going to pass into law. And that is basically going to cause all sorts of problems as far as freedom of speech is concerned. And we're on here just now exercising our freedom of speech and basically causing debate among people. Not everybody agrees, not a lot of people are watching this right now as they, oh God, it's him again. But we cause debate. We get people to talk, we get people to think, we get different kinds of people coming to watch the programme. And at the end of the day, this is all going to get so much more shortly. Now, the thing is, for me, I'm going to be taking a very radical stance that not a lot of people are going to agree with shortly. Because they're saying, oh, the SNP have to get a majority. Well, for me, yeah, the SNP need to be in government in the next term, the way they are here. And I will agree with that. They do. Because if you don't have them, you get the unionists. But one thing we do not want is the SNP win absolute majority like they had in 2011. Because if they do, they will take every single vote that you've got and they will use it to get all their little pet projects in. Like, you've seen what's happened already with the hate crimes bill. It's gone through, in spite of the fact that 83% of Scotland do not want it. And the GRA bill is going to be coming out very, very soon into the new parliament, because it's obviously the hijackers that have taken over the hierarchy of the SNP are desperate to have it put into place. And that's going to basically affect every woman in the country and the right to safe spaces. And if somebody complains about it, you can go to jail for 7 years, because that's going to be in 2 weeks' time. So that's all going to be happening if the SNP get an absolute majority in the election. I am going to be campaigning for any party, independence party, on the list who can take this area or other areas. It might be one party in this area, it might be another party in another region. I'm going to be campaigning for everybody who supports independence, except for the Greens, because they're just as bad in the GRA as SNP, to be able to take those seats. And yes, I want an SNP government, but I want an SNP minority government with a strong second independence party holding the balance of power to hold their feet to it. And that's what I'm going to become campaigning for. And a lot of you say, oh, but if we don't get it, we'll not get independence. Well, look, where have we got as far as independence is concerned in the last year? I don't know if you have seen the brochures that have been put out over the past couple of weeks for the SNP. Or you've seen the votes, or you've seen the ones that came out for the Tories. The Tories ones mentioned independence 17 times. The SNP's not once. Not one mention of independence in their election literature. Think about that. So I am going to be campaigning hard for anybody at all who will go for independence on the list, and I will be doing my utmost to make sure that the SNP do not get an absolute majority.
I think that explains why we've decided that the Twa Auld Heids we'll take a wee rest for a while. Listen, Dave, I mentioned the archive of programs, and it won't be obvious to anyone, but I'm going to try and make it obvious to anyone. If you watch those programs, you'll see me use certain phrases. And that's just the way my brain works. I try and put down talk about the seeds of independence. I try and put down my own seeds, the things that are in my mind. And I'm going to try and just repeat some of those phrases and expand on them, because it's the path I'm going to go down. And I've got a lot of questions at the moment. For a period of 2 years, all under one banner, asked me to be a fairly important steward on all the marches. And I listened to tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of yes supporters ask a question. I'll let you answer, Dave. What do you want?
Independence.
When do you want it?
Now.
Okay, and here's my question. Was that all hot air? How important was the word now? Not when do you want it? Well, maybe sometime in the future. It was
when
now.
Boris gives us a Section 30.
So I asked myself, how do you achieve independence now if that's what you want? The second phrase I quite often referred to was over sovereignty. You hear people, so one of the most common phrases you'll see on Facebook, I'm not on Twitter, so it's maybe there as well, but the people of Scotland are sovereign. But the question I've asked is, when have you ever seen the people exercise their sovereignty? Actually sit down and say, there was a famous phrase about no matter how high up you are, the people are above you. Remember that phrase came up in one of the discussions, Dave?
Yeah, it was on Martin Keane's court case.
How often does that happen, where the people actually exercise the sovereignty that they claim is theirs? So later on, I'm going to come to a bit where I'm going to try and suggest how that could happen. One is kind of unrealistic, and the other one I think is one of the most important things I'll ever say in these shows. When we say that people are sovereign, let me ask you a question. Does that mean that I individually, as one of those people, have my own sovereignty? What do you think, Dave? Are we individually sovereign?
Yes, we are.
And it's when we express it individually. See, I'm going to come on later on to the Declaration of Arbroath, but on the 6th of May, each of us, if we haven't used the postal vote, we'll go into a voting booth. We'll be given a piece of paper and a pencil, and we'll make a wee mark on that piece of paper. Anonymous. No one will ever know that we were there. No one will ever know how we voted. I think what the Declaration of Arbroath, and I will come on to it, taught me, it's one of the lessons I learned, is if you have a belief in the future of your country, you can't be anonymous. You've got to be able to state that. And if individual sovereignty applies, one of the things I'm going to come on to is how you can maybe express that. I mentioned the Declaration of Arbroath. Let's have a look at what it is. Now, it's most commonly known, not just in Scotland, but throughout the world, for the words, as long as but 100. I want you to look closer at what actually was there, because it's something I'm going to come on to about individual sovereignty. There's a piece of parchment. For us nowadays, we can't afford parchment, so let's just call it a piece of paper. Now, I don't know of any yes supporter that can't get hold of one sheet of paper. What would they wrote that in their time, what would we write on our time? What would we actually say as an individual that we wanted? What was it we were declaring? We wouldn't declare Section 30, we wouldn't declare this or that. We would declare the independence of Scotland. And something I'll come on to is, ignore the words on there just for the time being. Look at how they identified themselves. they each had their seal. Now, I don't reckon, I might be wrong in this, someone that understands history, I don't think one Saturday they all got together and brought their seals with them. I think that would be done as it was passed round. So all across Scotland, maybe what we need is a way in which we take a sheet of paper, agree the words on it as individuals that we actually want to declare, and then find a way of making sure that can't be done fraudulently, that there's a way we can identify ourselves, not with a seal, but with something that is peculiar to ourselves. Let me try and give you an example of what I'm talking about. This is, I'm going to call this unrealistic, because amongst the discussions I've had with lots of people, because we all have different routes to independence, this is maybe not going to work. But that's a piece of paper. In 2016, I had to ask for help because I'd never been on Facebook before. How do I get on Facebook? I've had to learn an awful lot since then, but I then chose, and with the help of the person, Russell, that helped me choose that image. I chose that image in 2016 for a very, very specific purpose. Again, it's one of the seeds I put down, something I do instinctively, which I know will be important later on, but it could be quite a long while after. Now, I've just written words on that piece of paper. A declaration of Scotland's independence in his name, with his mark, made by this sovereign Scot. Now, I actually don't think, Dave, that 2.25 million yes supporters will support that. I think that's the difficulty of the digital covenant, Scott. But I believe there are people in the yes movement that are capable of finding a piece of paper and writing on there words that are important for Scotland's independence, maybe different words from different people. But that's one of the paths I'm going to go on. A declaration of growth starts with the words, as long as 100. Now, I think they wrote that on the basis of, if there's only 100 of us left alive. So one of the things, I don't know I'll do this, but one of the things I'm going to look at is not to look for the last 100, but the first 100 that will join me in trying to show that Scotland has sovereign people who are willing not to be anonymous, who want to be recorded in today's history for the future, that they wanted the Scottish independence. So how do you do this? I want to introduce you to a person called Henry Faulds. You ever heard of Henry Faulds, Dave?
No.
Right. In my opinion, everyone in Scotland should have heard of Henry Faulds. Henry Faulds was born in Ayrshire, Scotsman, and he trained to be a medical doctor, qualified as a doctor. He then became a missionary. This is back in the 1800s, and his mission took him to Japan. And what he did in Japan, and he celebrated, this is a strange thing, he's actually celebrated in Japan, and very few Scots know about him. He started a hospital, and he started a society to help people in Japan that were blind. And he helped cure a rabies epidemic. Quite a huge task in Japan. But here's why I think he has an importance for us in Scotland just now. His hospital he'd been out working with an archaeologist, right? And he'd been looking at stones and what were on the stones. His hospital was broken into, and someone was arrested. And what Henry Faulds did, having learned from the archaeologist, he looked for something, and he found a fingerprint. This is the importance of this story. He found a fingerprint, and he looked at his own hands. And he noticed that the fingerprint that he'd found was entirely different from the fingerprint in his own hands. And he went to the police, and he proved to him that the person they'd arrested wasn't the person that was had that fingerprint that had broken into the hospital. So we have a Scot who travelled to Japan, who was the first person to work out the forensic importance of fingerprints. So if I took a document like that could be fraudulently produced all over the place, and put my fingerprint on it, and write my name and my address on the back, and then take my polling card. I've done a lot of the things that the digital government set out to do, but, and this is the point I want to stress, I think the achievement of that, although it was done once before in Scotland and over 2 million people signed a covenant, I think it's unrealistic. I think there's something more important that we can achieve as a yes movement. What I want to do now, Dave, is not talk about something that may or may not be unrealistic. I think there are enough people in the yes movement who would take a piece of paper, agree the words on it, put their fingerprint on it. But I don't think I'll ever get to 2.25 million, not before the 6th of May. So let's deal with what we're facing realistically on the 6th of May. I'm going to read you something. Comes from the first court hearing of Martin Keating's Section 30. And the words are from Lady Carmichael. It's part of her response to the Martin Keating thing, which, as you know, is going forward to appeal. There's 4 paragraphs in it. I won't read them all. I'll summarise the first one. In the forthcoming elections, he and every other voter has a right to vote for representatives in the Scottish Parliament. It is correct to say that the Parliament derives its authority, its strength and legitimacy from the electorate. It is, however, the elected member who then go on to make judgments. GRA, Hate Crimes Bill, in their capacity as legislators. The representatives derive their authority from the voting decisions of the pursuer and those entitled to vote. The proportions which representatives from different parties and independent candidates are elected will no doubt affect what bills come to be introduced, what bills come to be passed, and the terms in which they come to be passed. I do not accept as correct the pursuer's characterization of individual voters as the decision makers in relation to the introduction, promotion, or passing of particular pieces of legislation. That takes me back, Dave, to the maze that I started with and the questions I've asked. You want independence now? You've passed your sovereignty to someone else. You are the sovereign people. No, you're not. You're a voter. You might vote, you might not vote. But the Lords of the Parliament, where we started over 300 years ago, are the people who will decide what your future is. That's my biggest question in this, because I think that is something that is fundamental to the whole discussion about the independence of Scotland. Not just for the next couple of months, Dave, but for the future of Scotland after it's independent. And that's why I raised this thing. I think it's the most fundamental thing that the Yes movement have got to consider. Because after independence, there will also be people who voted no to independence. We're all going to live together. We've got to find ways of actually trying to balance what democracy is. Here's what's going to happen after the 6th of May. We'll have elected members of the Scottish Parliament, or they will have got there through the list system. They'll go into the Parliament. And I'd like you to leave that document up, Dave, for quite a while whilst I'm speaking, because there's parts of it that are important that you need to read through thoroughly. But that's what happens once we've elected our members of the Scottish Parliament, whether they're yes or no. The first thing they're going to have to do is decide on which oath they're going to take. And either of those oaths, when chosen, is an oath that they will adhere and swear allegiance. And I'm not saying this as a Republican, I'm saying it as a realistic fact that will happen. Allegiance to the Queen and all her descendants. Think about that for a second. If you're a yes supporter, you've done everything you can over the next few months to make sure there are as many independents supporting MSPs into the Parliament. And the first thing they have to do, and unless they do it, they aren't a working MSP. No salary, no seat in the Parliament, no taking part in any of the votes. The first thing they have to do is swear an oath of allegiance to what keeps us in the maze. There is no oath to the sovereign people of Scotland that got them there. And that's the path I'm going to try and pursue, Dave, over the next 2 months, is to establish a wording where I could go to someone who's saying to me, Mike, I'm all in favour of I'm all in favour of the SNP, AFE, ISP, and we are going for independence. We will not let you down. I'd like that person to swear an oath along those lines to the sovereign people of Scotland that put him into the MSP position. Realistically, I don't expect him to have to not say the oath in the Parliament, because his power or her power comes after swearing that oath. It's all sorts of funny things, Dave. You know this. There's all sorts of funny things happen. People put their hand behind their back, cross their fingers, lift. We've seen all. That's kids' play. We're talking about the future of Scotland when we're doing this. Is it too much to ask a future MSP that I will fight tooth and nail to get elected to recognise that he's there because of the sovereign people and to acknowledge that through an oath? Last bit in this bit, and sorry I'm going on at length. Later this month, the Parliament itself will go into recess. But unlike previous years, something won't happen when it goes into recess, which normally happens, which is there's a dissolution of Parliament. Parliament itself ceases to exist. This year, because of COVID, they've passed an act which says that the dissolution of Parliament will take place on the 5th of May. The election will be on the 6th of May. Immediately the Parliament is dissolved. Let me ask a question, and I'll answer it for myself. Only the sovereign people of Scotland have the destiny of Scotland in their hands. It's the 15th of September 2014, a period of 24 hours when it's only the sovereign people who have the destiny of Scotland in their hands. Once before, Dave, you and I put our heads together, and we got Pete Scally, David McGuinness, Graham Brown, Wendy MacDonald, all to take a trip up to Dundee. And we put together a song called The Road to Independence. I suggested the song to you. You chose the words and we mucked about with it. It's been a privilege working with you on this, Dave. A couple of months ago, I said to you, you quite like David Bowie. He's got a song called Heroes. And I asked you if you would work with me to try and produce a version of that for the independence movement. I'd hope you, after you've had your say in where we are at the moment, my friend, I'd like you to play that first verse of that song that we put together.
Aye, it's been an interesting journey we've had, Mike. We've been up and down, we've been roundabout, we've been everywhere, and over the last year. we've met a lot of friends. We've met a lot of people we didn't know inside the movement, and it's been quite an experience. And as I say, this whole program basically came about because of conversations that you've had, and we thought we really should record these, because when we start having a conversation, Mike's got this thing that you may have noticed if you watch any of these archive programs he's talking about. He likes to go off at tangents. God, honestly, tangents. He goes off at more tangents than I say basically, or at the end of the day. It's been an interesting year, and I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any more Twa Auld Heids, but at the end of the day, and I've said it again, there's a battle to be fought, and it needs to be fought over the next 2 months, and that fight is for the future of Scotland. And we've all got different ideas of how it should be. We've all got different ideas of who should be leading us in it. We've all got different ideas on whether we believe people or disbelieve people. But at the end of the day, we will all vote yes, if we ever get the bloody chance to. And the biggest problem at the moment is that I don't think we're going to get a chance to unless we give these guys a real boot up the arse so that they remember why we liked them in the first place. So I will be working to make sure that the SNP are in the next government, but they're not in the next government by an absolute majority. And then after May the 7th, if I'm successful and we have an independent government, then we can all get our heads down and start like basically holding their feet to the fire, making sure that they keep promises that they got elected on, which I also have my doubts about, but we'll see. But the difference is, if we do it the way that I see it, we'll have a way of being able to force them to do it, give them an absolute majority, and they will just ignore you. They'll just ignore you. Because, and folks say, oh, but the SNP wouldn't do that to us. They've already done it to their own party. What makes you think they'll be any different to the country? That's it. I've kept myself quite restrained while I'm saying that. And I know these are all going to be going mental doing the unionist work for them. At the end of the day, there is nothing will do the unionist work better than somebody in absolute power not pushing independence. And as I say, all you've got to do is look at the history of the last 6 years. There you go.
Dave, we met in Glasgow, Freedom Square.
Yep.
Then we formed a wee studio at Dynamic Earth, and we had conversations. And that's where this all started from. We originally thought maybe once a month, maybe every couple of months. We've actually done, I think I'm right in saying this, close to 50 programs, totally diverse. I hope they have informed people that watch them in the same way as they have informed me. It's been a privilege, Dave. Let's end with the first verse of the song that you and I said has an importance. Bye for now, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. We'll see you somewhere on the barricades or over the other side. Talk to you later. Held us in chains forever and ever. We could be healed, but just for one moment. wish you could see. Sail country when Scotland is free. Nothing, and nothing bad's and change. We can free Scotland forever and ever.